Hello and welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about movies, about music. I'm Andrew Keatts.
I'm David Lizerbram.
Today we are here to talk about the fantastic Todd Haynes film, The Velvet Underground, released just a few weeks ago on Apple Plus. If you are a listener to the show, you may have already listened to our interview with Christina Vachon, the producer of this film. However, today is going to be the day that we go deep. David is already chomping at the bit because he has a lot of things to say. About this movie.
Hot takes.
All right, good. Before we get there, we have some innovation in the Rock Doc space.
That's right.
There are some moves to be made in our introductory question, because this week it is not a question at all, but a competition.
That's right.
We are going to have a draft of our top talking heads that appear across the Rock Docs cinematic universe.
Not to be confused with the band Talking Heads.
Yes.
People who often talk and appear on Rock Docs.
They're not disqualified.
Right. Sure.
If you want to draft Dave Byrne,
he's on the board.
He's on the board. However, what we are talking about is any person who makes regular appearances or even one very memorable appearance in a talking head segment in Rock Docs. David and I are going to do a 3-round mock draft, snake style, of course, to build out a team with which we will never do anything.
Yes. We will then judge ourselves and determine how we did.
I'm going to think of it as though I'm casting a fictional rock doc of who I would want to talk about.
Okay.
Some indeterminate band.
Okay.
All right. So do you have a coin?
I don't have a coin.
Do you have a flippable thing? All right. I have this phone case. Does this phone case work for you?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Right. It could be loud. I'm going to put it on this bed here.
Yeah. Flip it on the bed. Yeah.
All right. This is heads. This is tails.
Okay.
All right.
I'll call it in the air.
All right.
Heads.
It is tails.
Okay. So just to confirm the format.
Yeah.
You will draft first.
Yeah.
Then I will draft again, then once and then twice, because that's in the second round.
Yep.
Then you draft twice, then I draft once.
And then we'll be
That
done.
makes perfect sense to people who do not do a lot of fantasy sports.
That's exactly right. So that is the format. We went back and forth on this. We decided on 3 because we wanted it to be difficult.
Yeah.
There's a lot of memorable talking heads out there.
Sure.
Again, not David Byrne. Not Jerry. Talking about the people who appear in these. We wanted it to be hard, so we wanted it to. You actually have to make some decisions.
The pressure is on.
You have to actually choose.
This time it counts. First pick.
First pick. I have a clear number 1.
Yes.
There's a strong presence on my big board going into this.
Okay.
I'm taking Questlove.
Questlove. Okay.
Yes.
My prediction was that one of 2 people were going to go number 1. This was not a situation where you had a clear number 1 consensus.
Yeah, this is a Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf situation.
It could have been one or the other, but definitely one of them was going to be Questlove.
Okay, yeah.
So for the second pick in the first round,
all right,
I'm taking the person who you all are yelling that name right now.
Yeah, this is the guy who's I can already tell. This is the guy who comes up in this in this segment when you're making fun of the people who make too many appearances in Rock Docs.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Go
He's
ahead.
a 2-time Rock and Roll Hall of Famer.
Okay.
He shares a name with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's Dave Grohl.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So a little breakdown on our first picks.
Yeah.
I think they both do basically the same thing for our respective teams, which is they play the role of both a musician who can speak to the influences that some hypothetical musician had on them.
Yeah.
And who can speak knowledgeably about a time and place that they were involved in, a
Yep.
specific scene. And they are, by any account, certified experts.
Yes.
They're critics.
Yeah.
They can play your contemporary, they can play your expert, your historian, your critic, your fan, all at the same time.
Right. I mean, they both are kind of celebrities.
Yes.
Not Beyonce level celebrities, but definitely people that, the average person would know. Questlove's been drumming for The Tonight Show for 20 years.
Yeah, Questlove's on The Late Show.
Right. And Dave Grohl is obviously hugely famous. They're both drummers. Interesting.
Interestingly, they are both drummers. I wonder what that says.
Kind of like how a lot of baseball catchers go on to be managers. Like they're kind of sitting back there watching the whole game.
Yeah.
Might be a drummer thing.
Okay. All right.
So that's the first round.
All right.
So the second round is starting now. So I'm going first in the second round.
Yep. Okay.
For the first pick in the second round,
Yeah.
I am taking Henry Rollins.
Also, very strong. Very strong.
Guy
answer.
shows up.
Yes.
You want to talk about any band or musician?
Yeah. Or skateboarders.
Or
he's a regular appearance on like the Bones Brigade. He makes an
Sure.
appearance on, which has a very rock docs vibe for a non-music documentary.
Yeah, basically, yeah. You want to talk about nearly anything?
Yeah.
He might show up in front of one of these mics right now.
Yes.
He just might walk in the door.
It's like a non-zero chance that if we invited Henry Rollins on this show, he would do it.
It's certainly possible. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the second pick in the second round goes to you.
All right. I've been hemming and hawing on this. I'm having a tough time. I'm taking Jimmy Iovine.
Jimmy Iovine. Okay.
Yeah.
Famous producer.
Famous producer. Because he's a famous producer and because of the time frame in which he was a famous producer, he really gets me a foothold in lots of different styles of music and different eras. Mm-hmm. You know, he can talk to me about Bruce Springsteen, Patti Smith, Tom Petty.
Yeah.
He can talk to me about Dr. Dre.
Yes. His
Eminem,
famous
you know.
Dr. Dre, with whom he founded Beats by Dre.
And has a 7-hour Vanity Project documentary, which I actually think is pretty good.
Yeah. And so Jimmy Iovine, his company was bought by Apple.
Yeah.
He's certainly worth a lot of money.
Worth an awful lot of money.
So he's not appearing in these rock docs for the dough.
No. He's got just fantastic Talking Heads appearances in the Running on Empty. Or excuse me, not Running on Empty. That would be a Jackson Brown doc. This is on Running on a Dream.
Yeah.
For the Tom Petty doc.
Yes. Okay.
Has really unique insights into the making of that. And so, anyway.
Okay. So round two, we had Henry Rollins for me, and we had Jimmy Iovine for you. So now we're starting round three. Once again, you're picking.
Yeah.
This is the last round.
Yeah. I'm going. This is my wild card. This is working out exactly how I thought it would.
This is going to be the wild card round.
Yeah,
Let's just say.
I'm going wild card. Give me Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the king of trashing hotel rooms.
Sure.
I'm sure he's got a wacky story, partying with just about everyone you could imagine from the James Gang era up through Hell Freezes Over when he started wearing weird squiggly pants and being kind of a goofball.
Mm-hmm. Kind of got sober, and now he has like the wisdom of age.
And, which he legitimately does. I don't know if you listened to his interview on the Marin podcast. It was very, very like wise man.
Dude. Yeah, no question.
Yeah, the Tao of Joe Walsh. So anyway, Joe Walsh.
Okay, so now I have the final pick in the third round. Mm-hmm. The last pick in this draft. Mm-hmm. I could pick anybody.
Well, except for Jimmy Iovine, Joe Walsh.
Who has not yet, of the five people.
Questlove.
Other than those five people, I can pick anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm literally debating this right now.
You're in a tough spot.
There's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Elvis Costello.
Also very, very good. He's kind of Questlovian in his ability to wax poetic about music and other musicians.
Yes, a music expert, a music historian. His book, which I highly recommend, very literary, not in a way that makes it not fun to read, but just like well written. And the guy just knows he's been there. He's just kind of he's played with the Roots. He's played with this band and that musician and classical and pop and reggae, whatever. You name it, he's done it. He knows, he's just got all the stories. He's remained relatively sober enough to remember them and tell them. And he shows up with that, fedora. You're watching a rock doc and boom, he's there. And you're just like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah. You're like, is this guy in the Buena Vista Social Club?
Exactly. It could be. It's possible.
Right.
So.
All right. So those are our lineups.
Your team is?
My team is Questlove, Jimmy Iovine, and Joe Walsh.
Okay.
And yours is?
Yep. Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
Henry Rollins. Elvis Costello.
Fantastic. All right, this is good work. So here's what I think we're going to do with this. We may come back and do another round of this at some later point. We can maybe play with the format, something like that. But
we could also track, like as we go through,
who has the most appearances.
Hey, there's my guy.
Yes.
There's my. They happen to all be guys because that's just how this works.
Yeah,
but
there were some ladies on my list.
Give me a name or two that was on your board that you thought about.
Well, it gives away the rock docs that are most in my comfort food rotation that I just listen to all the time. Mm-hmm. So Stevie Nicks.
Sure. Oh yeah, Stevie Nicks. That's a good one.
Yeah. But also Tom Petty.
Yeah, he would show up.
Tom Petty, like I was watching the Petty doc with my dad not too long ago, and my dad does not care about rock and roll music at all. And he was cracking up at how funny Tom Petty was.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he had broad appeal and it sets up his jokes, very self-effacing. So the Petty, I think, would work a lot. So those were a couple that were on my list.
I was really tempted to go with Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin is
dude shows up a lot.
Tailor-made for this.
He's got the beard.
Yeah.
He's worked with a lot of artists of a variety of genres and just again has that kind of wisdom Buddha vibe happening.
Yeah.
So you kind of get that perspective.
Yeah. So another thing I was thinking about was what about people who are memorable speakers but don't necessarily make many appearances as talking heads, like agreed upon, but sit down with the production team of a documentary, but there's found footage of them being guys at the time. I'm thinking of Jerry Garcia.
Frank
Zappa, right. Like, yeah, exactly. The Zappa documentary has lots of time of him going on shows and
sure
being wild, but it's not like he really ever agreed to sit down and talk about his influences.
Yeah, that's a whole nother category.
Yeah.
Warren Zevon,
exactly.
but that okay.
It's a different thing though, right?
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So that concludes the first annual or whatever we want to call it, Rock Docs Talking Heads draft.
Which has nothing to do with the band, the Talking Heads.
Yeah. By the way, I should say, feel free to play along at home.
Yeah.
We are at Rock Docs Pod on Twitter and Instagram and places. So if you want to share your own draft board, you and your friends want to get together and do your own Rock Docs, please.
Yeah. If you guys want to build a Rock Docs draft board.
We're not claiming any intellectual property over this. Just go for it.
All right, David. Let's get into this film.
Yes.
All right. The Velvet Underground, directed by Todd Haynes. It's an overwhelming visual experience, frankly.
Yes.
It really, I'll throw it to you to explain it, but I'll just say that I've watched this movie probably 5 times now since it came out less than a month ago. And every time my heartbeat rises. I feel at some point like I need to step away. I need to stop looking at it. It's like it's just an overwhelming visual experience. Talk to us about this movie.
Okay, this movie is it purports to be a fairly conventional documentary about the beginning, middle, and end of the band, the Velvet Underground, one of the most influential bands in music history. They were more or less active from about 65 to 70-ish.
Yeah.
Lou Reed was the lead singer and sort of lead songwriter, and more or less over time became the main creative force, and he went on to become a bigger star. Mm-hmm. But it's really much more, in a way, about the times that they were in and their influences. This is a very weird rock doc in that the Velvet Underground, the band, does not show up until 45 minutes into a 2-hour documentary.
Yeah.
Most of the band members aren't even mentioned until that point. You could watch, almost the first half of this and not even know that it was about a band called the Velvet Underground or what this was, what the core was.
Yeah. Well into the film, it is still only peripherally about the Velvet Underground.
Right, but it is. So what it is, so you may be thinking, if you haven't seen it, what the heck are these guys talking about?
Yeah.
What could this film possibly be? So really what it is about half-hour, 45-minute sort of like a seminar, I would say, about avant-garde art, mostly American art, in every genre you can think of. In the mid-century, so 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So music
and film especially.
Yeah, music, film, but also poetry, certainly visual art. It's not necessarily spoken of that much, but there's a lot of abstract expressionism and stuff that's just popping up on screen. And the way that it's told is through a lot of vintage clips. There's contemporary interview footage as well, but it's really visually dense. Like most of the time, as you're watching this, there's more than one thing happening on the screen at once. Like it's like the Brady Bunch style tiles, but like more of that. And it will be like, a dozen or more little boxes where, you'll have Allen Ginsberg over here and you have Jackson Pollock painting over there and you have, Andy Warhol doing something over here. And then you'll have Lou Reed from the band. Like you'll have just so much happening.
And over top of it, this avant-garde music, this experimental music that is, playing one note until the end of its vibration.
Right.
That creates this cacophony, this overwhelming cacophony. It's an assault on your senses.
Right.
And so like visually, you should imagine it. It's often a montage, or if it's not a montage, it's a split screen where at least two things are happening with equal weight for large sections. I mean, there are times when there's something reasonably conventional happening on screen, but even in the beginning when they walk through one character's the beginning part of his life, which is standard fare in any documentary or any music documentary, it's juxtaposed with, and this is the other part of this movie, is they have an immense amount of archival footage from the Warhol estate.
Yeah.
So Andy Warhol, the pop art artist, was the Velvet Underground is to some degree a art exhibit of Andy Warhol.
It's an Andy Warhol joint.
It's an Andy Warhol joint, right? The band, the whole thing is a work by Andy Warhol. And so he is as much a part of this movie as Lou Reed, or more in some ways.
Yeah.
And so the Warhol estate has provided them lots of footage, including his famous screen tests,
right?
Which would have a person, usually a beautiful person or a compelling person, staring into the screen for long periods of time.
Right. Warhol would say, if possible, try not to move, and if possible, don't blink.
Yeah.
So you just you're staring dead on at that screen in black and white, kind of grainy footage for long periods of time.
And so they explained that he and I don't know enough about the way film works to understand this, but they slow it down just so much that while you're looking at a very just a human looking back at you, it is just inhuman enough for you to feel an emotional twinge, basically.
Right.
That it's not moving at the speed that you expect to see another human face moving, and that introduces just enough dissonance to create an emotional effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with Warhol, like a lot of people, is like, oh, he did the soup cans and maybe pictures of paintings of Marilyn Monroe or something.
Velvet Underground cover.
Yeah, the banana cover, whatever. If you have just a very passing familiarity with Andy Warhol, part of what this movie, I think, is trying to do is to show you why he was an innovative visual artist across multiple media. And, they're not making that point up front, but so much of the footage is, directed or created by Warhol or under his supervision, that you can't help but somehow see this as a bit of an Andy Warhol film, and to understand what it was that he was doing and what was interesting about his perspective.
Right. And so when the movie begins, with a reasonably conventional approach by saying, who is John Cale? John Cale, here's his start. Here's when
he's a Welsh viola and bass player, classically trained, who came over in about 1960 to New York, escaping a pretty bleak experience in Wales, where he had a very bad family life. He alludes to having been molested by a priest, a whole variety of things. He comes over, basically sponsored to study with really interesting avant-garde classical, or art type musicians. Nothing to do with rock and roll at all.
Yeah.
And that's what brings him into New York, where, eventually he's going to run into Lou Reed, who is from New York, like a New York guy down the line, who is a very difficult person. I mean, I'm not going to try to beat around the bush. The guy had a lot of problems, but he, was very challenged at times by his homosexuality or his bisexuality, his sexual, preference. He was a pioneer in using every kind of drug known to man. But he also graduated from, where did he go to school?
Syracuse.
Right, Syracuse. Oh, yeah, right. He graduated from Syracuse with a degree in literature. He had...
he was in college bands at the time.
In a way, these are two very educated people compared to every other rock star at that time.
Right.
Nobody had a college degree.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where we are in terms of these two. The main characters of the film are Lou Reed, John Cale, and Andy Warhol.
Yes, 100%. And but when they're walking us through their early life story, there's this very unique thing they do, which is the story is happening on one side of a split screen, and the other side of the split screen is a screen test of the other person.
Right.
When they're talking about Cale, it's a screen test of Lou Reed, I believe. And when it overlaps at some point. And so it creates an interesting effect as a viewer that the screen tests are an incredibly alluring thing. You're drawn to look at them at the same time that you're getting all of this childhood footage of what John Cale's life was like or what he was doing in his avant-garde training. But you're kind of not looking at that because it's really hard to look away from the screen test that's happening right next to it. So even when it's being conventional, it's being very unconventional at the same time. And it's like it's a work of Warhol about Warhol.
Yeah. I would say that. I think, for me, I don't want somebody to listen to this and get the impression that, this sounds like a college class that's boring about avant-garde art or whatever. I feel like that is... We were running into the danger of driving into that ditch.
Yeah.
And I found it all very entertaining. I mean, I like this stuff, so that's me.
Yeah.
But I think that they were trying to show the pleasure of this kind of music and the art and film and experimental work that was being done around that time. It was it's presented as being exciting and interesting and sexy and fun and creative, and it's not it's not there's no sense of any of these people are sort of trying to show they're smarter than you, or you wouldn't get it. It's meant to be understood on some level, and the movie really takes pains to tell you what they're showing and what you're listening to, and explain why they found it interesting or why it was compelling at the time.
Totally.
And so I don't think it's the kind of thing where you are just going to feel like, oh, I don't get it. What is this
over
stuff?
my head. This is experimental. Yeah.
It's not. They're not explaining it in a boring way. And then this happened, and then this happened. But they draw you into it, where you're like, oh, I want to see what they're doing here.
No, it's very entertaining in the simplest way. There's a lot happening, and it's new and different. It's watching it is not like watching most documentaries. It never slows down, and you just have a long stretch of an interview. Anytime that there's a long period of somebody talking, there's 5 other things happening on screen at the same time, and they're playing crazy music. But that makes it that doesn't make it. Although there's a seizure warning at the start of the film.
That's true.
You know, but so it's there's a lot happening. But it is by no means boring, and it is also by no means intentionally inaccessible.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I think. Okay, so kind of moving the story along at least. We basically have John Cale who's working with these experimental musicians. Lou Reed, after college, he was playing guitar and playing in early rock bands, and he got a job with a cut rate record company. That basically what would happen was in the early 60s. There was, popular songs like The Twist or whatever, dance crazes and just
surf
teeny
rock,
bopper
yeah.
surf songs, whatever.
Yeah.
And so he got a job with his record label where his job was to write and produce and record songs that kind of sounded like that. Make up a dance craze that's the Octopus. Okay, that's a thing. Do that.
So you could put it on the on the shelves at whatever department store,
right,
with a generic title,
right,
like
and so,
Rock USA songs,
right, and so like the Beach Boys album might be $1.99, but this one's 99 cents, and this one also has like songs about the beach.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get this for my kid. They'll like this, and so he's basically getting this training of like churning out catchy like rock pop songs, playing the guitar, singing, making it up, etc. He this intense training while he's also trying to become a poet. I mean, he studied under Delmore Schwartz at Syracuse, who's really an influential, important person in his life. He was a very significant poet in like the 30s, but by the time he's teaching at Syracuse and Lou Reed encounters him, he's had many years of alcoholism, and he basically was just a professor who would just take students under his wing. He was gay, so he would have sexual relationships with his young male students, which at the time, I guess, we look on it differently now than it probably was looked at then. But he was just, he really encouraged Lou. And Lou did not lack for self-confidence. For all of his problems,
Yes.
lack of self-confidence was not on the radar.
Yeah. So I'll say, because it's around this part in the film that a couple different people say Lou always wanted to be a rock star. Lou said early on, I want to be a rock star. We hear that a couple different times. And one thing the film lacks, really, is much Lou Reed. Because he's dead by the point that they're making this movie.
Right.
He doesn't sit down and have the wisdom of years to look back and discuss this in retrospect as John Cale does. John Cale comes across as this like very lovable older guy who's still incredibly smart and very charming.
Right.
Lou Reed doesn't get, he can't, I'm not going to say that he would be that way anyway. It's not exactly Lou Reed's vibe, but there's no presence of Lou Reed today, or even Lou Reed talking about Lou Reed in his own words.
There's a little bit, but there's very little, just because there's just not a lot of that audio or video out there.
Yeah, and so they have some, and they use it when they can. But one thing that they don't ever say is like, why did he want to be a rock star so bad? There's like 3 times that somebody says Lou knew from when he was really young, before he went to college, he wanted to be a rock star. But they don't really, you don't actually learn much about what Lou Reed loved about music and what Lou Reed saw about being a rock star.
That's true. Yeah, maybe there's just no way to approach that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily mean it as a criticism, but it does stand out that in another version of this movie, you understand what he liked about it. And like in Long Strange Trip, they have a very similar discussion about Jerry Garcia and how early he wanted to be a musician and how he got involved in old-timey music and how his relationship with music. You learn quite a bit about how he saw music, how he saw himself in music, what he wanted to do with music. You actually don't get a very in-depth understanding of what Lou Reed's relationship with music was.
He seems to have had the insight early. I mean, he wanted to get the hell out of Long Island, which was like, he a suburban environment that he really didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be a writer and poet. And he saw early on, this is like before Bob Dylan, that somehow he put it together that this could be his medium. That he could be a writer and poet on the level of the beat poets that he, liked and William Burroughs and all these people, but within a rock and roll medium. I don't know how he had that insight, because he actually went and did that, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's precisely what he did.
Yeah, like imagine, that's like, I'm just going to go to the moon now. Like, this is really the early 60s. I mean, before even rock stars were even that much of a thing. Like there was Buddy Holly and Elvis had come and gone,
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a little bit of an omission. I mean, there's definitely things that are missing from this movie.
There's a lot missing from it, and some of it in very positive ways. There's a lot of clearly intentional decisions about what they did not want this movie to be.
Right.
And I would say 95% of the time, those choices really work.
Well, I mean, unlike the rock docs that we alluded to at the beginning of this episode, there are no interviews or anything from anybody in this movie who was not there at the time. Like there is no like, and here's Bono to talk about the influence of the Velvet Underground, or even Iggy Pop, or anybody. Like you had to physically have been there in order to be interviewed and to participate in this project.
And here's why I think that's such an interesting choice. Is like, if you know one thing about the Velvet Underground, if you're like a college kid who's just starting to get into music, if you know only one thing, it's that cliche quote that not a lot of people bought Velvet Underground records, but everyone who did started a band.
Right, exactly.
The famous thing about the Velvet Underground is how influential they were.
Outsized relative to their sales and the number of people who came to see them live and anything. And
that you can still today draw straight lines from their music to the Strokes, from their music to Billie Eilish, and earlier that you could draw straight lines from their music to punk and new wave and post punk, and Lou Reed was around for a lot of that in the downtown New York scene, and that the story of the influence of the Velvet Underground is like bigger than the story of the Velvet Underground in a lot of ways,
and it's completely absent from this movie.
Never spoken of one time, which I think was a fantastic decision. It's so much more interesting to actually just be immersed in their world.
Yeah.
In the 5 years that they existed than it is to, hear REM talk about how much they liked Velvet Underground
to rehash
records.
The story. Here's Thurston Moore.
Yeah.
The reason we're talking so much about the prehistory and the movie goes so much into the prehistory is because they want to show where this came from. And I really like that, because in a lot of rock docs, for better or worse, what you'll get is like, here were their influences. They liked the Beatles. And then you get like one tiny 2-second clip of the Beatles at Shea Stadium. And they liked, B.B. King. And you see like a little clip of B.B. King playing the guitar. And it's like, those are the influences. We've covered that in 1 minute of film.
There's no more need.
That is almost half of the movie.
There's no more need for any documentaries to be like, first, when I was really young, I saw Elvis Presley.
Right.
And then when I was a little bit older, I remember the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It's like, we got it. Right. I understand. You were a rock star in the 70s.
We can license from the Elvis Presley estate 3 seconds of Elvis Presley. That's what we can afford, so that's what we're going to show.
Yeah.
This is not that movie at all. They go deep into the influences, and that's, because, you can't, if you listen to the Velvet Underground today and you've never listened to them, some of their music sounds sort of like conventional rock and roll in the sense that we've been listening to their progeny, their heirs, for the last 55 years. Mm-hmm. Some of it still is frightening and terrifying and weird,
totally.
Which is cool and great. But it is sometimes, from just like taking a quick peruse of their top plays on Spotify, like, oh, Sweet Jane, okay, that sounds like a rock song, not that different from 10 million other songs I've heard since then. So this really sets up like, how did this, where did this come from?
Yeah, and so we haven't talked about him as much, but the movie spends a lot of time on John Cale.
Yeah.
And what a visionary and experimental musician he was, and how much of a role that played in it. And that it was Cale's experimental thoughts along with Lou Reed's poetry,
street vibe,
and straightforward doo-wop sensibility. I mean, like like you say, like rock, like he really has like a doo-wop like sensibility.
Yeah,
in a lot
like
of ways.
Early rock and roll.
Yeah. And so it's the combination of those two things that sort of defines the Velvet Underground, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. That plus the like marketing genius of Andy Warhol, who's kind of is hip to them when they very early. They finally get together. I mean, not to blow it together. And now the movie introduces briefly the two other founding members, Sterling Morrison, the guitar player, and Mo Tucker, the drummer. Now, Sterling is barely mentioned in this movie, although he, musically had arguably an equal role because his guitar play. Lou was a very good rhythm guitar player, but like very rough and experimental. But Sterling was a much more prettier guitar player. Mm-hmm. At one point, I think John Cale in this movie says Sterling played the guitar like Ernie Isley from the Isley Brothers.
He does. Yeah.
which I was like, whoa, okay, that's a different. I wouldn't have thought of that, but it is kind of like that, soulful, but also just like nailing every note just right, and that aspect of it does kind of put that polish on the music. That I think is kind of... I just don't think he gets his due in the movie, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Maureen Tucker, Sterling Morrison died in 96, so, a long time ago. He's not here to tell this story. Maureen Tucker, the drummer, she was a very interesting... Nobody's ever played drums like her before or since. She didn't play with cymbals. She stood up and played like, with the floor tom and all these kind of weird... assembly of drums and had this kind of Bo Diddley primitive kind of vibe going. She is around to be interviewed, and boy, she is awesome.
Yeah, talk about somebody who could be drafted in the Talking Heads draft with a single appearance.
Yeah,
Mo Tucker.
Oh my god, yeah,
so good.
She just showed up and hit a grand slam her first time out of the gate.
Does not have a high opinion of Bill Graham.
She doesn't have a high opinion of Bill Graham. She does not care for hippies at all to this day.
Still to this day, it's not like she's talking about the way she felt at the time.
No.
She's still today. She's like idiots.
Yes, that is not the way to achieve peace and harmony in the universe. She doesn't care for California.
No,
she has a lot of takes.
Yeah,
and yet she is, she's lovable. She's a very lovable curmudgeon. Like John Cale comes off like the Welsh uncle you wish you had.
Yes. Yes.
Just warm and, happy to talk about whatever avuncular, if I may use that term. That's a thing I've read, but probably never said out loud. Mo is like, oh, if you knew she was coming to Thanksgiving, you'd be like, I got to prep myself. She's going to bring it. Yeah,
she's awesome. So, all right. The California thing, this might not be exactly the right time to get into this, but so they talk for a fairly long time in this movie about how much they hated California.
Yeah.
How much they hated the music scene in California, the industry, and then just the culture around music in California. They fucking hated.
Yes.
These were like very cool downtown New York people.
Yes.
They wore all black everywhere. They rolled with Nico and Andy Warhol and Gerard.
Yeah.
And they played
the whole
factory.
Yeah, the whole factory crew.
Factory crew. They played shows in Boston and New York.
Yeah.
And they certainly toured elsewhere and did well, but they did not like anything about the bands that were in LA, the scene in LA, being in LA.
As far as I can tell, every show they ever played was in a grungy warehouse crawling with junkies.
Yes. So, but I think they're not being honest about how close they were to some of the things that were happening in California.
Yeah.
Like, they specifically single out the mothers of invention.
Right.
And look, like whatever you'd like, whatever you but like mothers of invention, like we talked about it a few weeks ago. Frank Zappa hated hippies.
Right.
They both hated hippies.
Yes. Get on that level.
They both hated hippies, and Frank Zappa was like an avant-garde experimental musician. He was not doing the Mamas and the Papas thing, or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It was not the Laurel Canyon sound, even though he lived in Laurel Canyon.
Right. Well, yeah. I think what happened, and they talk about it in the movie, their first record, the Frank Zappa and the Velvet Underground, were both produced by the same guy. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened was the industry, just decided to go in the direction of promoting the mothers of invention and Frank Zappa, and the Velvet Underground, they always had chips on their shoulder about getting their due. So somehow Frank kind of overshadowed them in a different form of avant-garde, rock and roll poetry, theater experimental vibe. And they just felt like they couldn't break through. And I think that's kind of part of it. And they talk trash about it, but then I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain that Lou Reed actually was the person who posthumously inducted Frank Zappa into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So if I'm right about that, which I'm pretty sure, I know that there was a reconciliation at some point.
That's interesting. Well, so they briefly throw some shrapnel at the Dead too.
Yes.
And they they have a run-in with Bill Graham, who was certainly a San Francisco promoter who was big in the Dead becoming the Dead. And so I don't want to get too stuck in this, but I do have some quotes that don't make it into this movie that Lou Reed has said about the Grateful Dead.
I always love a good Lou Reed quote.
All right. So Lou Reed, this was in a 1970 interview. He's with Doug Yule, who was a later band member. We can get into it at some point. Quote, "We had vast objections to the whole San Francisco scene. It's just tedious, a lie, and untalented. They can't play, and they certainly can't write. The Airplane, the Dead, all of them." And so Lou later says, Doug Yule goes on and on about this, and Lou says, "Look, I can get off on understanding the kick it was to play Love Light, but they're amateur. They can't play." And now here's where we really get into it. "Jerry's not a good guitar player. It's a joke, and the Airplane is even worse, if that's possible." Doug, "Jerry, he'll play the same solo for a half hour, but if he'd done it for just 2 minutes, he plays the same notes over and over and over." Lou, "You listen to the Beatles or you listen to Gimme Shelter by the Stones, and Keith isn't playing so many notes. But the notes he is playing are so thought out, so perfect." All right. So it goes on and on like that for quite some time. He has mean things to say about Jerry Garcia and the Dead. I'm not here to litigate that, except to say, in New York, beginning in 1965, there was a band that was originally called the Warlocks. They began having a series of concerts that were thrown together by a visionary artist named Andy Warhol. They were experimental light shows. They were experimental images on screens. They had very countercultural people, not in counterculture by which we actually mean the culture, but actual counterculture at the time.
A lot of drugs.
And boy, the band who was at the center of that freak out scene.
Classically trained bass players
who are avant-garde composers. And when they stepped out of that scene that gave them a degree of popularity, they could not record a record that would sell for anyone's money. On the other side of the country, there was a band called the Warlocks who was part of a very thrown together freak out scene put together by a visionary American artist named Ken Kesey.
Right.
Who had a lot of people doing a lot of drugs, throwing images, lights, projections on the walls. Multimedia happenings. They had a very experimental guitar player. They were making a lot of noise. They were playing with what was possible in a rock medium. Mm-hmm. And when it was time to capitalize on the success of those events to record, no one wanted to buy those records.
Yeah.
I think that the Dead and the Velvet Underground have a lot more in common than the Velvet Underground are willing to admit.
At one point in this movie, somebody cops to the fact that there were a lot of fans that they had in common. Mm-hmm, I think nowadays, it's just like the Beatles and the Stones, man. Like I think in the 60s, there was a lot about choosing sides.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a polarized society now.
Yeah.
But in a different way, the 60s pop culture liked to pit people against each other.
Yeah.
And Lou Reed just loved spitting venom and hot takes to the media.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as they put a microphone in front of his face, he was like, I was born to do this.
Yeah.
And so, how much of that is real and how much of it is just posturing or trying to careerism, trying to present yourself as the, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. But, I feel you, man. So I want to pick up the thread a little bit and say, so Andy Warhol, kind of takes this band under their wing, kind of puts together their visual style. He has the insight that these four people look like Morlocks, for lack of a better term. Like they just crawled out of a sewer. Yeah. And if we're going to make this commercial, perhaps we have somebody who is extraordinarily good looking.
Perhaps we could hire the best looking human that ever existed.
Yeah. So
who also happens to sing, kind of.
In strolls this German, like 9 foot tall supermodel. I think John Cale calls her an iceberg at one point.
Yeah, he explains that the visual style was that she would be an iceberg,
right,
and that they would be like the detritus around her.
Nico, who had been in Fellini's La Dolce Vita, was a kind of fashion model. Also was a kind of bohemian musician of her own. Like she'd recorded. Mm-hmm. She wasn't just like some whatever person that had nothing to offer to the world. She was an artist in her own right. And she went on to live a very experimental bohemian lifestyle. So this was not like a detour for her. This was just part of her, of her artistic evolution. But Andy basically sticks her in front of the band and tells Lou, like, she's now going to sing some of your songs. And that's the deal. Yeah. And I guess, even with these strong personalities, they all just kind of went along with it because they probably looked at each other and said, well, that's probably the show I'd want to see too.
Yeah. If they have a problem about it, it doesn't come out. I mean, Mo Tucker seems pretty intent to mention that she only sang 3 or 4 songs.
Right.
She seemed that seems like the way that they held onto it. Like, well, it's the Velvet Underground with Nico. It's not like she's become our new front person.
Right.
Although in those early days, she kind of was.
Right.
So
the first album is called The Velvet Underground and Nico. Clearly there's a separation there. Mm-hmm. It's not intended to be like she's part of the band. Yeah. And so the first album, she sings on 3 or 4 of the songs, and I mean, she crushes it.
Yeah, still awesome.
But I mean, that's one phase. The band goes on to make multiple albums. And, she's only there for that part. She went on to work with Jackson Browne and many other artists. And
which also is like, to bring me back, I'm sorry to belabor this, but like, who could be more representative of the California music scene than Jackson Browne?
Exactly.
They're
hanging out with Jackson Browne.
Yeah.
That seems cool.
Yeah.
But the Grateful Dead are posers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So then... Now at this point, we're probably 2/3 of the way through the movie. And
yes.
The Velvet Underground has released 1 album. They basically then like speed run through.
White Light, White Heat gets like 8 seconds of discussion.
Yeah. Exactly. Like bang. They do White Light, White Heat. Super, avant-garde, totally different from the first album. More in the experimental, noise side of it, less, kind of pop stuff. Then... For whatever reason...
real quick sidebar. I listened to the New York Times podcast about the Velvet Underground movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know, this might be a well-known story, but apparently Lester Bangs, when he would visit the homes of other rock critics, he would take out their White Light, White Heat record and examine it to see how often it had been played. And like if it hadn't been scarred up enough, he would regard them as posers.
Which is fair.
And then...
Like, you're not really sitting around listening to Sister Ray all day long.
Yeah. And so then I thought to myself that in the Almost Famous scene where Lester Bangs is in the record studio, he pulls the record off the shelf, White Light, White Heat, and screams. And so I wonder if that was that was Cameron Crowe put that in the movie as a loving nod to Lester Bangs having done that. So in any case.
So they run through the rest of it. Lou fires Andy Warhol. Then he fires John Cale. Doug Yule comes in as kind of the second guitar player / bass / whatever. And the group has limited, if any, commercial success. The music goes nowhere, and commercially, and eventually the band kind of falls apart in mutual recriminations, drug use, everything else you can think of. I mean, that kind of speeds through the rest of the movie. The kind of narrator who comes in for the second half, who is just unbelievable, is Jonathan Richman.
Yes.
So Jonathan Richman is a singer-songwriter who, if you've never listened to Jonathan Richman, please stop listening to us talk. Do yourself a favor and go listen to Jonathan Richman. He's incredible. if you just start listening to his music, you're going to think, what could this possibly have to do with the Velvet Underground? His music is like warm, open-hearted, sweet, folky.
If you're wondering if you know him from anywhere, maybe you probably know him as the troubadour from the beginning and interstitially throughout. There's Something About Mary. The guy who plays the guitar and sings the song, There's Something About Mary.
So There's Something About Mary is now canonically part of the Rock Doc cinematic universe.
Yeah,
We've established that.
Yes. Also, Jonathan Richman, draftable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But he's never been in another Rock Doc.
It doesn't matter. One appearance gets you on the list.
He's
so good, and so he does.
So why is he in this?
Well, so if you did not listen to our interview with the producer of this film, what she explained, and I think she explained well, is that he gives them the fan perspective, and he gives them the the lasting influence of the music perspective.
Right.
But he was there.
Yeah.
Importantly, he was there, and that's what he's really talking about. But he speaks glowingly about the band and how they were how they treated him, and that he was invited to open for them a little bit. And
he was just a kid. He was like a teenager.
He was a high school kid.
He saw them like 70 times over the course of like 3 years.
Because he lived in the area. He was from Boston. Right?
And they would just let him hang out backstage and like show him guitar licks.
Yeah. And yeah, so I do wonder how much of it is he was just so good once they got him in front of the camera that the footage was too good not to use.
Yeah. He's awesome. But he picks up the acoustic guitar and he shows you like what they're doing. He's bringing the fans' perspective. He kind of brings in that sense of like a later influence.
Yeah.
Without explicitly doing that. And even just musically, he's just like playing on the guitar and showing like, what made their sound so different and interesting. Yeah. And he, on an acoustic guitar and just using his voice, is able somehow to conjure up the sound of like these 4 electrified freaks playing in some cellar in Boston in 1968.
Yeah, he's explaining. He says their bass line's like this, and he's just got an acoustic guitar, and he plays their bass lines a little bit. And it's like, oh, they do. Yeah, it is like that.
Yeah, he totally knows it inside and out.
Yeah. Richmond rules, but it is interesting that at this point in the movie's basically over. Loaded gets, I don't know, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Their most successful album.
Right.
Now, it's also their most, like, straightforward album. It's you mentioned Sweet Jane. Sweet Jane's on that, right? Yeah. Rock and Roll's on that. Cool It Down is on that. Yeah. All great songs. But it's it is much more Lou Reed. It's almost the beginning of Lou Reed's solo career.
Kind of.
Because Doug Yule is there, John Cale's gone by that point, and it's
Mo Tucker was in and out.
Because she was pregnant, which is like,
I guess they had rock and roll maternity leave in those days or something. But
well, she just says that she couldn't physically play the drums because she was pregnant, and they wouldn't wait to record for her.
Right.
So it's kind of the opposite of maternity leave. They kind of just screwed her over.
Yeah. Their career was going so badly that they couldn't wait to not sell any more records.
Exactly. So they make Loaded, and I love Loaded. It's a fantastic album that Phish has covered on Halloween and is very good when they did that.
I'm not falling for this.
But it is I think it's a statement that they spend so much less time talking about that than they do everything that comes before it.
Right. Subsequently, their most popular songs
are all from that album.
Yeah, and it's not really a big deal in this documentary because, well, I mean, John Cale wasn't there, Andy Warhol wasn't involved. It wasn't really the same. I mean, it wasn't influenced on its face in the same way by the avant-garde. Right.
Now you can see in in that album a lot of what they talk about with Lou Reed's influences. It's very much the doo-wop comes through much more strongly, right? And if so in any case, I don't want to get too far into it, but they don't spend much time on it, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And then the movie more or less ends there.
Yeah.
There's no victory lap.
Yeah.
There's no, we only sold X records by this point, and Lou Reed moved on with his life, but David Bowie, produced Transformer, and American music was never the same.
Right.
They don't.
No, there's no Walk on the Wild Side.
There's no Walk on the Wild Side. They don't do that.
There's a montage, which is strange.
They fly through.
The end of the movie is a really quick montage showing photos of the various members, their solo albums, their the original 4 members got together for a brief reunion tour of Europe in 1993, I think. So they briefly show a little bit of that. There's no music from that. It's only just photos. And then you just see kind of like Lou Reed, a photo of him at the end of his life, and so forth. But it's like then the next 50 years happened.
Yes.
But that's not relevant to this story.
That is not the story that the movie is interested in getting into. And again, I love that artistic decision, because you can get that stuff. You can get all of that by picking up back copies of Rolling Stone,
right,
or reading any rock and roll book,
right? Exactly.
That is out there in droves. What isn't out there really, and certainly not as well done and well executed as you get in this movie, is everything from they formed a band and became friends with Andy Warhol through Lou Reed fired Andy Warhol and John Cale.
Right. I mean, it really seems like the director, Todd Haynes, who we should talk about a little bit, wanted to tell the world about these avant-garde filmmakers, whoever, Maya Deren, Kenneth Anger, these musicians, Lamonte Young, and Mark Rothko, and William Burroughs, and so forth. Yeah. And wanted to tell the story of these people who were so important and influential in their time, and would have, because of the way the culture was, in the 60s and 50s, the people that are mentioned in this movie as like these weird artists, up to and including Andy Warhol, would have been sort of household names, because they were covered in like Time magazine and stuff, and you kind of couldn't escape it because there was only so many media outlets. Now most of these people are sort of forgotten unless you're into that stuff. And
the versions of them today are not part of popular culture,
right?
By any stretch of the imagination,
right?
Just culture is so oversaturated that somebody who's doing something that's genuinely on the cutting edge, it couldn't be farther from the mainstream.
Right. The most popular and well-known visual artist working today, in terms of a painter, is like I don't know, Beeple, who did the NFTs, or Banksy. Fine, but they're not as well known as Andy Warhol was in his time, or even Jackson Pollock, or any of the other people who are mentioned in that category here in this
Jasper
movie.
Johns.
Yeah, Jasper. I mean, these were just people that you knew them because there was only 4 talk shows on TV, and they would show up on them,
and 8 magazines that
I think what Todd Haynes is really has a lot of juice for is to kind of bring those people back into the conversation by saying, hey, you want to learn about this cool rock band that you've heard about or that you've listened to their songs? Well, guess what? Here's where it all came from. And I really love that. I want to talk a little bit about Todd Haynes.
Yeah.
Because this is the first documentary that he's done. He's known for experimental, very interesting narrative films. I mean, he's done Velvet Goldmine, which is obviously about music. He did Safe with Julianne Moore, early 90s, about this woman who just kind of eventually becomes allergic to the world, and it's really creepy and wild. Far From Heaven, also with Julianne Moore, kind of like a lush 50s Douglas Sirkian melodrama about a married woman who falls in love with her African-American gardener.
Boys Don't Cry.
Well, I mean, she produced that, but he wasn't with the director in that. But just kind of going through his filmography, so it's kind of like, where does this come from? I mean, he's into avant-garde art. He's queer. He's a lot of these things kind of tie in with him. But I went back and watched really the first film that put him on the map, which is called Superstar. Mm-hmm. So it was produced.
What year?
What's that?
What year?
Maybe 87.
Okay.
So, and it's available on YouTube. It's never been commercially available for a very good reason. So what it is this
early indie movie.
Yeah, it's about a 20-minute movie that is the story of the Carpenters, the band, the Carpenters.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yes.
And it's all about Karen Carpenter's, eventually death from anorexia, and her whole life story. And it's all told with Barbie dolls and these little sets, but it uses tons of Carpenter's music, and it's unlicensed. It was like just kind of an art film that he put together.
Yeah.
So, he never got the rights to use, just like Me, They Long to Be Close to You, when all that, all these huge hits. And so, so it was never officially released. It was just something that was kind of passed around and legendary. And it really is of a piece with this.
Yeah. Interesting.
The Carpenters and the Velvet Underground could not be more different in some sense. Like the Carpenters were smooth voiced AM radio pitched at the housewives of the world in terms of how they were marketed, very polished and had huge hits, huge blockbusters. And for an artist like Todd Haynes to see some value in their story as well as in the Velvet Underground, which was pitched to a completely different audience at the same, more or less the same time, the 60s, 70s, etc. You totally see the crossover. Like the movies are like companion pieces, and you can see how somebody would appreciate both of these artists.
Well, and so his other very music-centric movie is I'm Not There.
Yeah,
the Bob Dylan movie from 2007. And that movie is also conceptually similar in that it resists any urge to be what people would have expected from a fictional, a narrative piece of film,
right?
About Bob Dylan.
Well, they never mention his name.
They never mention his name. It's 12 or 7 essays that are either based on real events, some of them just straight fictionalizations.
Sort of about Bob Dylan with different actors.
Different actors in each one, including
famously Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett plays him in one, and does a great job actually.
Sure.
And it is good. It's good. It's a very good movie. I like it a lot. But I remember it being confusing to people when it came out because it's just such a unique set of choices. And I think this movie is like that too, is if you think you're getting just a straightforward rock documentary, he will not give that to you.
Right.
He enjoys very much not giving you the standard fare. And this movie hits a lot of the beats. In some ways it is a straightforward rock documentary, but it never goes all the way down the road of playing through the paint by numbers template.
Yeah, I just think like his chops are so good. Like he is just an incredible editor, has just an unbelievable visual eye, and a sense of the audio, like the way this should sound and feel, that he pulls off something that on paper seems kind of impossible, and something that might not be entertained to watch, he makes, to me, super compelling.
Well, yeah, one of the issues that I imagine they had at one point is there's not that much good footage of the Velvet Underground playing music.
Right.
They don't have a lot to work from that. There's some grainy footage out there, but the sound's not good, or it's not. They don't have a lot of it, or the visuals are crazy because it was part of this Warhol multimedia experience, right?
Right. They never played a big festival.
They never played a big festival. They never played big shows, really.
Yeah.
They were
like a garage band.
And so he compensates with doing all, the stuff we talked about at the top, where you cobble together what you have and you put it all together and you overwhelm people with all of these different things, and you use this atypical stuff that is still very good, and you use it to create frankly a more impactful piece than just and here's Lou Reed playing Sweet Jane for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's true of the music too. Like they're using Velvet Underground music from recordings throughout it, but it's not, when in the rare times where you are watching them play live, the music you're hearing is not them playing live. You're hearing other music for the most part.
Yeah. It's I want to go back to the very beginning of the movie. The one thing we didn't talk about was the absolute first thing you see in the movie is this footage of a very young John Cale.
Yes.
This is probably 62, I don't know, early 60s, well before the Velvet Underground. And he's just this Welsh classical musician. And he goes on to some like TV cheesy panel talk show.
Yeah.
And they're asking him about the composer John Cage, who had
he was a student of John Cage, right?
He was John Cale had worked with John Cage, and so had performed some of his work. And so John Cage would do these very strange compositions where he would do like one piece that was like 4 minutes long, but it was intended to be repeated for like 18 hours. Like you just played the same piano piece over and over and over and over again. He also did a silent piece that was famously like there was no music, there was no sound, like the piece was just silence.
One piece that was just destroying a piano.
Right, exactly. So they're asking John Cale about this one piece that was like 18 hours long that he had performed, and they brought on this guy that had been in the audience and who sat through the whole thing. And the suit and tie, conventional audience and other panelists are like laughing at this. Like,
yes.
Look at this mockery and this pretentious freak and whatever. And we watch it now and we're like, well, look at these assholes. Like what, they're laughing at this person that we know is going to be one of the stars of this movie we're watching. And it, went on to become a legendary musician in his own right after the Velvet Underground. Yeah. Musician, producer, composer, all kinds of other things.
Record executive.
Yeah. Right. He did all kinds of stuff. And, you see these like, rubes who are laughing at him because they think they're superior. And it immediately puts you in the frame of mind of like, you don't want to be that person. Yeah. You don't want to be this person who's exposed to this weird avant-garde art and be like, the like Don Draper looking guy laughing at them. You want to be like on the side of the cool people who's doing something different and interesting. And John Cale in this footage when he was a young man, maybe 22 or something, he's taking this all in stride. Yes. He's not getting upset.
He's playing along with the joke.
Yeah, he's playing along with it. He's
being
they're
charming.
Not getting a rise out of him.
No,
he's being charming, and he's like just like, I like this stuff. Basically, like this is what we're doing. He's not really doesn't really try to explain it. Like they're like, why do you do it? He's like, I don't know. It just that's what the composer said to do.
It says right here, do it. Yeah, yeah.
And but he has a good attitude about the whole thing, and it's just like, and that attitude of his carries through. Now I'm sure there was a lot of friction with him and Lou Reed, where he was not that nice, charming guy, where they were both completely wasted, but they, which also again doesn't really make it into the movie.
Okay, we find out later that like they broke up, but we don't really see them fighting in the movie,
right? But just using this vintage clip, which when they discovered this, they must have been like, thank goodness this exists.
It's 10 minutes. We can use the whole thing.
Yeah, it's so good, and it totally puts you in the frame of. It's totally disarming and puts you in the right frame of mind of the movie. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, I felt like I was in the hands of an expert. Like I just felt like I was in good hands, and that the story was going to be told to me, and I didn't have to wonder what to expect. It was just going to be a ride, and I knew what side I wanted to be on.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing we didn't talk about is the primitives, the ostrich.
The ostrich. I think I called it the what did I call it?
I think you said the ostrich. I think you said it right, but we just didn't really get into it.
I think I said octopus. Close.
So first of all, did you know this song before this?
No.
I didn't either. I wasn't sure if that made me like a poser Velvet's fan, but I did not know about this. Also, Lou Reed's sister does a very charming dance of the ostrich dance.
Oh my God. Yeah. Lou Reed's sister is interviewed in this movie. She does this in the history of women getting funky in rock docs. You've got Joan Baez getting so funky in Rolling Thunder Review, and now Meryl Reed, I think her name is, doing the ostrich, which she probably hasn't done for 60 years, and just busts it out. Oh my God, it is great.
And so apparently,
if I can find a GIF of that, it's going on the social media because it's so good.
It's very good, and it happens in split screen. It's another one of these moments where there's like 5 things happening in the screen at the time, but they they describe the Ostrich as this like novelty song essentially that Reed wrote that was aiming for a twist like dance craze type thing. But you can really hear a lot of what the Velvet Underground would be in it. It's like it's a drone. Like you could see them playing it for 12 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, and it giving space for improvisation and experimentation.
Yeah.
And it kind of fucking rules. Like it's a kind of an awesome song.
Yeah. Lou Reed could not help but write awesome songs.
Yeah, it's kind of really good. And it sounds a lot, frankly, more like what you hear on Loaded than what you hear on White Like What Heat.
Yeah. I just want so much now the full Lou Reed documentary. Like just start at the end of Velvet Underground and get the rest of Lou Reed in there. Yeah. I want that. I want John Cale. I want Mo Tucker.
Yeah.
I just want more of these people. This is definitely one where we walk away like, please give me more of these people.
John Cale comes across so likable in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a couple people there. I can't remember who says it, but somebody in the movie does say that he could be like a real asshole.
Yeah.
And that it was not fun to work with him. But there is no indication of that in the movie. There's like one scene in the factory where he's just like, I have a page of notes here that I wrote down. One of them is John Cale, just a dude. Because, man, there's like a scene where he's just like laying on the ground in the factory eating an ice cream cone, like laughing at other people's jokes. Yeah. It's just like John Cale being a dude.
There's another clip where he's just like doing biceps curls over the barbell.
Yeah,
which I just love.
Yeah.
Like, you know, progenitors of jock jams.
He's doing a shoulder press mostly, well, frankly.
You know, okay. I mean, it's so good. But, I mean, you definitely, just to kind of wrap it up, I think the quote that I come away with this movie is Jonathan Richman again, talking about the first time he heard the Velvet Underground, like, he traded for a record that somehow somebody had or whatever. He puts it on. It was their first record. Nobody ever knew of them. And he said the first thing that came to mind as soon as he heard their sound was, these people would understand me.
Yes.
And I think, like, for the last 50-some years since those records came out, like, people have heard this music, and no matter what sort of part of life they come from, have felt that way. Like, these people would understand me. Like, there's somebody out there who gets the vibe of being in my head.
Yes.
And that is just so, like, that is so, the fact that he captured that.
Yeah, and he kind of looks like he's getting emotional when he says it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Super emotional.
Yeah.
Jonathan Richman, like, please, all-star, Hall of Fame.
Jonathan Richman, Mo Tucker, John Cale, Lou Reed's sister, Meryl. You're all in the Talking Heads Hall of Fame.
They all are. Just please, just give them a talk show.
Yeah.
Give them a podcast. Give them something. It's so good.
All right, David, I have a question to ask you.
Yeah.
Would you recommend this documentary, The Velvet Underground, to a non-Velvet Underground fan just as a film? Does this movie stand alone for a recommendation?
I mean, I'm going to say yes, but.
Okay.
Although I've been effusive in my praise over the last hour, probably to a fault. I would say yes, but. I mean, if you're not hip to, if you're not open to being interested and exploring avant-garde, art of the mid-century, this is not the movie for you. Like, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
So if you're, if that sounds like it could be interesting to you on any level whatsoever, even just for an hour of your time, by all means, yes, this is that movie. If that's just not your bag and you're just into something else, please, God bless, but this probably will not satisfy whatever need you have.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think if you don't especially care about the Velvet Underground, and even if you don't especially care about, like, mid-century avant-garde art, I think you could like this movie for the experience if you go in with the appropriate understanding of what you're about to walk into. You're not going to have side conversations during this.
Yeah.
It's not
This is not a throw it on and hang out and
it's not light
while
fare.
You're making dinner.
Yeah, but if you and your spouse like to on Friday nights have a glass of wine and watch a movie that you actually pay attention to, you turn the lights on and you have like a screening, then I think you could do much worse with just about any movie than this one. And I think most people would really be, like I said, over. It is an overwhelming film to me. It is overwhelming to me. I've seen it 5 times now, and I still feel like I have to look away at points.
I feel like we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But mercifully, we're going to cut this short. Not short, but we're going to cut it.
Yeah.
That's it. You can follow us on Twitter at RockDocsPod, on Instagram, on wherever things are. We love hearing your feedback, and people have had nice things to say about the show, which is nice to hear. And with that has been
Rock Docs.